Welcome, Ramya. It's really lovely to see you today. Today we're going to talk about, turning points and, your journey from that turning point. So as with all my guests, I would love for you to maybe give us a little bit of a steer on what the turning point was for you that, led you to be the person you are today.
Good afternoon, Rohini, and lovely to have this conversation with you. And when I'm thinking of turning points, there have been lots of turning points, but one that I can pick up right away, which stands out, is really a Vipassana camp that I attended. How many years back now? I don't know, more than 10 years back, 15 years back, actually. But it does stand out in my life as a very significant turning point. Primarily, I think the difference that it made to me was it showed me a different version of me. It challenged the ways I had defined of, thought of, and myself. And it also changed the ways in which I had thought of my life itself. So if I start thinking about where does my life start and where does it end and what is the journey about, that definition also got transformed. And therefore, the way I started engaging with life also got transformed. Maybe we can take them one step at a time.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's,
So 15 years ago, you went on a Vipassana camp. And for those people who don't know what Vipassana is, it's a silent retreat, isn't it? Where you go in and you are not allowed to engage with the outside world or even talk to anyone. It seems like a really big, scary thing to do, especially because for so many of us, the one person we're most uncomfortable spending a lot of time with is ourselves, because we become almost prisoners in our own minds, right? What was it that made it's a big step? And for someone like you, who I know is very chatty and very, very extrovert from the little I know of you, what made you think that that's what you needed to do?
Great question. So there's a bit of a backstory to this, which is, so almost from the age of 4 or 5, I had this thing in my head that I'm going to become a monk someday. And I have like some weird stories, like my mom's caught me, and I'll just use the word caught me because for her it felt like she caught a little girl doing that, sitting in our puja room back at home and chanting Buddham Sharanam Gacchami. And God knows where I picked it up from, maybe a history textbook or whatever, because we weren't Buddhists. And I was chanting this, and I even remember the moment. And of course, I was doing this sitting in front of all the Hindu gods in our puja room. And my parents aren't very religious or anything, but my mom didn't like this. Like for her, this was a bit of a, what's going to happen to my daughter? Mm. And throughout, as I was growing up, I had a grandfather, my mom's father, who was sort of, labeled as a spiritual person in the family. And he had spent some time in the Himalayas, and, he had a different life. And of course, I mean, he did have children and all as well. But so basically, he sort of became my spiritual mentor. And I used to have these long conversations with him. And my mom was always trying to protect me because she was afraid that her daughter is going to run away to the Himalayas and become a monk. So even though I hadn't thought of that as an idea, it was almost like an idea projected at me. And I sort of grew up believing that I was doing whatever I was doing till the day when I would finally become a monk. I just never challenged it. I just like, okay, someday I'm going to become a monk. So teenage, growing up, all of that. And I got married. And even then I was like, yeah, okay, so I had different definitions of marriage anyway, but it still was there at the back of my head. And I sort of didn't challenge it. And so this was a time when I was living in the UK. I was living in London. I was doing my PhD at London Business School. And I had this really nice senior. His name was Jay. And he was a meditator, and he had done Vipassana before. And he was also very interested in Buddhist, and we were friends. And I used to keep speaking to him about my future when I become a monk, and all of that. And I was dabbling in Buddhism and sort of, I liked studying it and all of that. And one day he got really irritated or irritated or whatever. He was like, Ramya, I'm tired of you saying this when I become a monk. Do you want to become a monk or not? And he said, let's do one thing. I know a monastery outside London. It was, I think, a couple of hours by train. And he said, we'll go there on Sunday. They open up to normal people. We can spend an entire day there. See, have you actually gone to a monastery? Why do you just keep talking about being a monk? What do you know about being a monk? And I was like, that sounds like a great idea, because I had been parroting this since childhood, but never actually thought about what it would be like to be a monk. So we went off on one Sunday and we went to the monastery. The gates were open and for visitors on Sundays. And he just went off to the library and he said, walk around, do what you want. You're on your own. And, we'll meet at lunchtime and then we'll do whatever you want. And then we'll go back. So he left me and I was walking around and I loved everything I saw. There was so much, it was so peaceful. And I had learned other forms of meditation earlier. So I found a tree and I found different places. I sat down, meditated. I said wow, this is like I've come home. This is the place for me. It's so beautiful. It was very nice, full of nature, all of that. And so by lunchtime, I was like, I'm so glad I did this prototype. I feel like I belong here. This is lovely. And I didn't speak to anyone. It was just nature and the location and the vibes and me meditating in solitude. And at lunchtime, we had this, the way they'd organized it was all the monks were sitting on one side and the visitors on the other side. And because it was a Sunday, most of the other visitors had brought food as an offering in that monastery. And there was a nice buffet spread out and really nice, very tasty stuff. And then the practice was that the visitors eat first and then the monks eat. So we went and we served our plates, and I'm also a foodie, so I served my plate. I was all excited, lovely food, nice, healthy, very, sattvic food and all. And we were waiting, but we don't start to eat till even the monks have gone. And then there was a gong and all the monks lined up and they had just one bowl in their hand and it was their turn and they were all walking towards food. And I had this oh my God, there's this rich spread of buffet with so many, there were crisp things and, soupy things and all. And I was and I had a whole plate with compartments and bowls and spoons. And I was like, how would the monks fit it all into the bowl, into one bowl? And yet they had to do that. And they did that. And somehow in that moment, I had this epiphany, that they are the monks and I'm here and I'm always going to be here and I'm not going to be there. And I just had that, food is close to me. And I think food showed me that day that I really like richness, variety, exoticness, textures, and I wouldn't want to get it all into the linear journey that the monastic journey seemed to propose. And I just knew that, no, I'm not being a monk, not in this lifetime at least. And after lunch, I told my friend, we can go back, question answered. And since that day, I've never thought of when I become a monk because I know I'm not becoming a monk. But after that, I did have that experience of meditation there, which was beautiful. And I said, I'm not becoming a monk, but I'm getting into meditation in a bigger, deeper way. And again, it was the same friend Jay who said, Vipassana, why don't you try it out? And so I tried Vipassana.
That's such an interesting story. I could never have in a million years have guessed that you wanted to be a monk. And I suppose the question from that comes that, something inside you was even at that young age was telling you that you craved that, whatever that spiritual connection being a monk brings. What did the Vipassana do for you? Because it's one thing to meditate on your own terms and, to kind of fit it into whatever your busy life might be. It's another thing to go in and how long was it? 10 days?
10 days. Yeah.
Tell me about the experience. How was that for you?
Yeah. So it was beautiful. And I really did feel like a fish in water. So it wasn't difficult for me. and I didn't miss talking. So one of the other things, so I'm a writer and a poet, and I love writing. And I write a lot. Again, I've been, writing poems always. And one of a faculty member, actually, one of my favorite professors had once told me that, Ramya, you should never go anywhere without a pen and a book. Promise me that. And literally, I would go everywhere with a pen and book. And another little backstory here to just tell you how important writing was to me. We were on this, sort of summer holiday with family, and there were these choo 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 choo, and I had this big tiff with my father because he wanted to do one thing, and I've had tips, and I wanted to. So without getting into, I was in this very big, intense rage, and we were all sitting down to lunch, and I didn't want to eat, and I didn't want to, talk to anyone and all. And then I just walked out. There was little shops, bought a notebook, bought a pen, and sat down at the lunch table and wrote. And then I could eat and socialize. And so that was writing. So, poetry, prose, all of that. And this teacher who had told me this knew this about me. And, he was like, never be without a pen and paper. Now, for such a person, now, Vipassana was scary, not because I can't speak to people, but what if I get a poem? I need to write it, So I went to the manager there are managers in every Vipassana camp, and she was this nice German lady, very strong, but very peaceful and firm. And I told her name was Helen. And I was like, Helen, I'm a writer. Writing for me is a solo activity. It's not extroversion, right? So, and in Vipassana, you're not allowed to keep pen and paper. So can you make an exception for me? And let me keep a little notebook and a pen, because when a poem comes, it's sacred flow and I have to write it. That's part of my life purpose. And I gave her all this hard sell on make an exception, and I need to keep one pencil and paper. She looked at me very sweetly. I just remember the way she said it. She said, Ramya, let the poem come. If it's important, it will stay. It will come again. If it's not, it will go. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Let the poem come. If it's important, it will stay. If it's really important, it can come again after 10 days. And if not, let it go. And I was like, impeccable logic. And I let it go. And that created so much space for me, Rohini, because in those 10 days, I got a lot of creative ideas. There were verses, there were poems, there were things. And I could just let them come and let them go and not feel compelled to make it concrete. And in that flow, I could let me come and me go, the essence of me, how I defined myself. And of course, so in Vipassana camp, there's also 1 hour of lecture every day where we listen to a recording. So there's a lot of education. So my whole worldview of what life is expanded. So instead of thinking of my life as a journey between my physical body's birth and death, I started looking at it as an infinite flow with infinite lifetimes before and infinite, what looks to me like infinite lifetimes and possibilities in the future. And this one just being like, like you have in these Shakespeare plays, Act 1, Scene 1, Act 4. So some Act 14, Scene 53, me in this body. So sort of, more of flow and less concrete. And that's what I started experiencing with the whole definition of Ramya, her thoughts, her creation, what she needs to do, everything. So, yeah.
That is, I think the way you described, just allowing things to come and not feeling like, you have to hold on to them and somehow immortalize them. That is such a beautiful, and I think it's such a powerful reminder that actually the universe is so abundant, that these ideas are kind of constantly floating around. They will come back if it's the right time, the right person. So what happened for you? I mean, obviously the Vipassana experience you mentioned was easier for you than maybe for a lot of people. Did it change your perception of who you are you mentioned you made space for yourself, to be you. Tell me what happened when you came away from that after those 10 days.
So I was a different person. And I didn't realize that as much as the people around me. So my husband then, he was like, oh my God, this is a different Ramya. And he actually got inspired to attend Vipassana soon after that because of seeing the transformation in me. But my mother told me I was different. Everyone told me I was different. And then I got solid proof of the difference in my body. So just before going for the Vipassana, I had actually trained for the London 10K. And I'm not a runner, but I was doing this as part of a charity and we were a group training for it. So I trained very hard over almost 6 months to build up my stamina to a point where I could walk and run intermittently and finish the 10K. But I've been training. And one of the things, in Vipassana camp, you can't exercise also. You can do light yoga and walking, but you can't do heavy exercises because you eat only 2 meals a day, breakfast and lunch, no dinner, and you're meditating 10 to 11 hours. So that was my other concern, that what happened to my stamina? All this fitness that I've built with a powerful regime over 6 months, it's going to drop. But I was okay, that's fine. The 10K is anyway over and I'll build it up. So when I came back from Vipassana and I went on a run on the street outside my house, I ran for, and I'm not making this up because I don't have any reason to, I ran for 30 minutes without a break. The maximum I had managed with all my training before the 10K was 5 minutes. So what my rhythm was 5 minutes of running, 1 minute of walking, 5 minutes of running. And I built that up over months. And now from 5 minutes running, I was at 30 minutes. I was like, what's happening? I'm not tired. What's happening? I'm not tired, right? And that's when I realized there's so much connection between the body, the mind, so it's not just the physical muscles of the body. Obviously, there's a much bigger orchestra and game going in there. And it can be explained, now I can explain it and understand it a little more in terms of, catching the sensations and all, and the chemistry of my body changing. But, even without going into all the explanation, that's a change. That's a new Ramya with a new wiring in her body, mind, muscles, everything. In her giving up because she's tired, or the story she's creating over, I can only run this much. All of it was gone. And that was yeah.
Gosh, I mean, this is a great advertisement for Vipassana, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I want to know, did you go to the one in London, the one in the UK, or did you go back when you went to India?
So I went to the one in UK and I only did it once. And here's the funny thing. So because the next year, the year after that, I got pregnant. So I had booked my Vipassana camp for the next year. And before I went, I realized I was pregnant. And my son is actually, my parents call him Vipassana baby because I was practicing very regularly. So, doing the 1 hour sit in the morning and evening. But once he was born, I couldn't do the 1 hour sits in the morning and evening. And that's just the kind of, everyone reacts to motherhood differently. I didn't have the time and space needed to sit. So I lost touch with the long sits, but I started doing shorter runs of meditation. And I actually never went back to attending Vipassana or even practicing it in its traditional form. Mm-hmm. I practiced it for an entire year in the traditional, a little more than a year in the traditional form, but I started picking up other practices of meditation, micro practices, things that I could do with a baby, and those have grown with me. So I don't miss Vipassana, but it's paved the way for almost everything else that I've learned and what I do now.
Yeah. So obviously 10 days, you learned a number of things. You learned how to be with yourself. You learned, did you learn specific meditation techniques? I was just wondering whether, you learned certain breathing technique because, your running, suddenly being able to run may have had something to do with, your breathing much more.
Absolutely. So yeah, one of the starter parts of Vipassana is called Anapana meditation, which is watching the breath. And Yeah.
And if someone went to a Vipassana, retreat, what are the things that they need? Because there's no good just going for 10 days and feeling amazing and you come back and you go back to life, exactly as it was before. What kind of things did you come back with that fundamentally changed your way of living and being?
Yeah. So one is definitely continue doing the practices. I personally know a lot of other people who've attended and come back and not done the meditation. So if you don't do it, you don't do it, right? You're going to go back. That's one. And so even when I stopped practicing Vipassana in its core form, I continued with other forms of meditation. So you have to do something to some form, right? To continue to reap those benefits. The second thing is, I guess, at least for me, and this is a personal thing, I know it happens with some people, it doesn't. I resonated very, very deeply with the theory that was taught. And that may or may not happen, and there's no way of forcing it, but it just made so much sense to me. What we learned as the concept of dharma, as the concept of metta. There's metta, which is really loving kindness meditation. And I've not even heard about anything like that. So the first time we learned about metta, and it was like, feel loving kindness from your heart. And I could feel nothing. I could just feel like stone. It was a new thing in my life. I was like, what is this? Feel love, think of someone you hate and radiate love towards them. Think of someone you love and radiate. Think of yourself and radiate love. It was so new to me, but it made so much sense. So I guess if it makes sense to you, it in some ways the motivation never leaves you, right? And then build a practice on top of that. So yeah, and there's no way to ensure that it makes sense to another person. So give it a try, and if you resonate with it, lovely then.
So the meditation was something you carried on, and it probably was something, were you doing that before, even before you went to Vipassana? Because obviously you were very much into being a monk.
Yeah, so I'd learned other forms of meditation.
Right.
And frankly, and this is just, I'm not saying Vipassana is more superior to those, because I've gone back to some of those now and I can go deep. Yeah. But it's just where I was in my journey combined with what I'd learned then. I hadn't gone very deep. Vipassana helped me cut through a lot of things. And also maybe because it's just such an intense practice, and maybe I was ready for it. And yeah, and that was sort of the first time I found access to a space which I didn't know existed. Like, I'm just, for lack of other words, I'm going to call it the space of me, or the space of the universe.
Yeah.
And which I can now access with practices that are not Vipassana, but other practices. But this was the first time I even knew that, oh, there's this space.
So tell us more about that. What did that feel like? And what is it actually, what did it teach you about yourself and your connection with, I suppose, the universe?
Yeah, so in a very humbling way, that I don't exist as a self. And in a very empowering way, that I exist as everything. And both of that. And I still switch between these two sort of ways of really looking at myself. And both of them are wonderful, because I'll tell you, the former, because I remember, so I was studying at London Business School, which is like a very left brain. It's a business school. Like, you walk into it, everyone's in suit. The energy there's very different. So post Vipassana, when I was walking into school, I felt like almost like this invisible, light, playful being, where I was like, I had a sense of self that was sort of beyond. It was like in a different plane or dimension from everything that was going on. So I felt like, okay, I'll give you an example. I was very, very, very vulnerable and susceptible to my professors' opinions of me and the grades and the feedback and the mark. And, whether they say, good morning, Ramya, or good morning, Ramya, it would make a big thing. It would be a big thing to me. But post Vipassana, I was like, yeah, they're doing their thing. And I'm just here being my thing, which is more spaced out, which is beyond that, the role of being a student and engaging with this other person.
Yeah.
And so that helped change a lot. I still use that. And the other thing that helped a lot was, remember, so one of the parts of Vipassana, for example, is the loving kindness meditation that you do at the end, which is called metta. And I really started practicing that, like, diligently. Like, so I'm a diligent student, right? So even though this was the least intuitive part of the practice for me, because it was not intuitive, I wanted to do it even more. So I used to pick the professor that I hated the most, or the person I disliked the most, and practice metta with them. And then I realized that actually, when I interacted with them, there was a shift, there was an ease. And that person hadn't done anything. I had done everything, right? That too, with my eyes closed, sitting on a mat in the realm of the invisible. And then when I meet this person, there is more ease in the actual interaction. So, sounds like Harry Potter, but it works. So I really started doing more of it. And I was like, why am I not going to do it? So, those are the practical effects of the invisible, eyes closed work that you can do. And I've never let that go away, because it's like a magic wand.
So it's such a simple example of, what Gandhiji used to say about be the change you want to see in the world, and kind of taking upon yourself, that the onus of making that change rather than hoping someone else is going to change. So in terms of, you mentioned when you came back that other people around you noticed that you had changed. To what extent did you experience difficulty in fitting back into the place that you left as a different Ramya, and you came back and suddenly you had changed, but maybe the people around you hadn't? How did you adjust to that? Did it affect any of your significant relationships? And I'm interested in whether you ended up making any significant changes in the way you interacted with people, or the people you interacted with.
I did. And interestingly, I've never connected the two till now. So thank you for asking me that. But yeah, there were lots of shifts. The people I started hanging out with, I mean, one was, of course, my relationship with my spouse, but I don't want to go too much into that in details for sake of his privacy. And yes, there was a shift there, but, and of course, that was major. But I think even beyond that, just in terms of the kind of people I started hanging out with in school, right? And the things that I would do earlier for validation and approval, which I stopped doing, therefore, which meant I was doing different things on my weekends and saying yes and no to invitations in a different way. I think I got myself the freedom to be more of me, which did mean some people left my life, new people came in, and there were changes. There was a change in my schedule, all of it. And of course, because, just a year after that, it also, I ended up getting pregnant, and that's another big, that changes a lot of things also. So I never really made too much sense of, how much of it was Vipassana and how much of it was the pregnancy, but that's when a lot of changes started.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I'm connecting what happened there with the earlier comment about, the thoughts and the ideas, just if they're meant to stay, they'll stay, or just let them flow, let them come and go.
Yeah.
I think it's the same with people, and it's the same with opportunities in life. We are so tempted often to hold on to things because we think, oh my God, if we let this person go, what will happen to us, but
Yeah.
from what
Yeah.
you're saying, you came in with this kind of belief that, we're all connected. It's okay. I'm just going to be me. That's so beautiful. I so want to go and do it myself now. And especially as you've told me, it's not far from London. So thank you so much for that. So let's kind of move on from that. So that was obviously a huge turning point, and a few things changed in your life, as you alluded to. Tell us what happened next. How did it change your, I suppose, your perception of what you were meant to be doing, whether in terms of career or in your personal life?
So, how did it change in terms of my career? So I guess in terms of my career, like a lot of things started happening in parallel. So I mean, I wouldn't attribute it all to the changes that happened in Vipassana. And there were seeds that were sown before that, and seeds and new windows that opened up post that. So it's going to be very difficult to say, which window and which opportunity came next. But I think one of the key shifts that happened, this whole paradigm of inside out versus an outside in. So earlier, I was someone who always thought of, and that was the only world I knew, achievement is something that's outside in. So like I get the marks, or, I do the work and I see it's all happening in the external. So results are all external. And what I want to do is in the external space. So even using the metaphor of writing, even if I'm writing something, the inspiration sort of coming from inside, but I'm creating it outside, which can be seen, touched, felt, consumed, appreciated, used by others. One of the key learning shifts that happened for me in Vipassana was actually to become very, in a nice way, but self-centered. And so my understanding of the way I started relating with life is that, so think of this flow of the energy of Ramya, right? Across lifetimes, this time through this particular body, making sense of this thing. That's also when I really understood, or, what I feel is understood, the notion of karma, which sort of is, the impressions and footprints of things I've done in previous lifetimes coming in as attributes, elements, energies that I can now play with and therefore craft my future. So in this journey, it really became about, it's like an internal flow journey where the external now has just become the context or the vehicle or the playground, which then shows me things which I need to work upon myself. So if I go back to that example of, here's a professor that I really can't get along with, and I'm always in conflict with this person. And now I do loving kindness meditation, and I go and I have ease. And it shows me that yes, if I work on myself, I can make things easier in the external. But B, what the theory also shows is that perhaps he is just like a postman that was put in place for me to discover what I will call a stone heart, because I did have a very stone cold heart. And for me to start learning to open up and to love, and for me to do that in our practice. And he's just a postman, an instrument. So let's not worry too much about him. Who is he, his name, his gender? It's not about him, it's about me. It's my journey. And at most, I can feel grateful that he came in to show me the work I have to do on myself. And along with that, the belief that at that time in my life, this was very strong for me, that if I don't work on myself, even if I chop off this person's head because he's so annoying, and I was the kind of person who could have done that to people, life will just bring another person exactly like him, because I've not learned those lessons that I needed to learn, or I've not made those internal changes and shifts that I needed to make. So, and that's what I think made people around me feel like I was way more tolerable and easy, because now I wasn't trying to change anything, blame anyone, fix anyone, people they weren't so important to me. I was important to me. And therefore, I just became more tolerant and even grateful of other people and circumstances and situations.
Yes.
So this whole inside out approach is what I took into my career also. So while I had read a lot and thought a lot about, I toyed with the idea of working in the social sector and being a contribution and making change. I think a lot of those sort of just went out. I was like, what if the world doesn't need fixing? What if nobody needs me? It's just, they're all sort of just there as these illusions, as these, images or props. Yeah, props in my life to make me work on myself. And that's the thread I followed in my career also. So if I'm studying something or learning something, it's because I'm interested in it. And then, everything that I do with others sort of just turned into more of side effects and ripple effects.
Yeah. So I'm so happy you brought up that point about being self-centered, because I've often said that, people sort of think self-centered is same as selfish. They kind of use it synonymously. And I think that the more I think about it, they're not the same thing. Self-centeredness is exactly what you said. You take ownership of your own role in any situation. And it's kind of that oxygen mask analogy when you're on a plane, put your own oxygen mask on before you try and help somebody else, because otherwise you're not going to be much good. So I'm so happy you explained that so beautifully. And I kind of also felt that, from what you were saying, we must view other people, other situations almost like mirrors that show us who we are from different angles, different lights. So if we don't like what we see, then maybe we need to look to see, well, what is it about us that's reflecting back in this way? So that's beautiful as well. So in terms of your career then, obviously you went to business school, and you went to business school obviously at IIM, but you also then did your PhD. So did you have a plan in terms of what you were going to do with your qualifications? What was your career sort of, goal at that time?
Yeah, it was very weird, because I'd sort of embarked on the PhD driven by just a single question, which was to understand why people work. So I remember the first day in my PhD course where we all had to introduce ourselves, and I was like, I'm here to understand the people-work relationship. And the professor was so sweet. He was like, wow, Ramya, there you have your life's purpose already. And I didn't realize that it was going to be such a big thing. And I'm still trying to understand the person-work relationship. And the reason I had even got interested in that was because I hated my work when I was working before that. I tried to work at a bunch of places and it was not fun for me. It didn't make sense to me. And so when something doesn't make sense to me, at least this used to be the way I used to approach life. I'll study it till it makes sense to me. So I decided to study the person-work relationship. And that study continued. So I was doing that in my PhD. I was attending Sanskrit classes in the UK, paying out of my stipend. And here I could have, learned it for free in India. And there I was learning it so that I could understand the Bhagavad Gita, because I had been told, and I know that, the Gita in its own way looks at the person-work relationship. And I was also looking at the person-work relationship in Buddhist texts. So this was really, so I was studying and learning for myself. Like, I just needed to know. So I never thought of myself as a teacher. It just was almost a scary thought. So PhD was fine. I was teaching on the side. I used to teach negotiations at LSE. Why? Because I needed money and that's the chance that I got. I wasn't really connected. It wasn't really me, but I was just doing it, right, as a side gig. And I must say, I still don't think of myself really as a teacher. Teaching just seemed to happen on the side, to the extent that, and my PhD was not so that I could teach. It was so I wanted to understand this. But I also needed a job. And then, there were all these family things. And I wanted to come back to India. My husband, then we had a kid. By the time I finished my PhD, the kid was 3.5 years old. And we had these visits from grandparents, both sides, and long, sobby heartbreaks when they had to go back to India. And I really wanted to come back to India. And my husband, then he told me that, well, and both the grandparents was based in Bangalore. Get a job in Bangalore, and then we can move back. And because it's a big shift, right? And so I didn't even apply anywhere else. So the job that I took in Bangalore was just so that I could move my family back to the place where all the grandparents were, and I need to teach. And that's how teaching happened. And once I started teaching, I still don't enjoy all kinds of teaching, but there was this one course that I just got very lucky and I started off with, and it was Vasanti actually. She was the area chairperson when I had to give my application, and she was like, Ramya, term 6 is starting, which course would you like to teach? So I gave her, I put on negotiations and this and that's, well, the ones in which I had access to course materials, I'd been a TA or taught at LSE. Right at the bottom, I just put this course in called Personal Values, Goals, and Career Options, because it's something I've been thinking of. Someday, I will create a course around this in terms of what I would have liked to know when I had been an MBA student. Yeah. I didn't want her to pick it up. And she ignored everything. And she said, that sounds interesting. So here I was. First course that I ever taught was this course. I literally, the universe just brought different things. The first batch of students, 40 students signed up, and they co-created the course with me, and it's been co-creating itself for the last 10 years. And that's the one course that I continue to teach at Bangalore now. So the other teaching that I did was more, hey, I have a job, I have a PhD, so I teach. But yeah, this is the work that I now continue in my work as a coach, as part of crafting our lives, all of that really, helping people craft their lives in line with their values and creating goals that are meaningful, aligned with them. Yeah. And everything that I learned along the way in the field of management, in the field of positive psychology, just fell into my lap again from a student. There was a student in my class who was like, you're talking about all these things. And I did this course in positive psychology, and maybe, so much resonates with what you've been talking about. And then I opened and I went, oh my God, there's this whole universe here. And that's how positive psychology came into my world. So, and I realized that all of these things that could be used for making ourselves happier and more effective in work. So happiness has always been like a key motivator. So one of the executive programs that I was teaching at IIM Bangalore was called Leading with Joy. Then it became my flagship program for executives. And again, based on positive psychology and some of my own stuff. And I also bring in things from philosophy because it's very dear to me. And I've learned as much from philosophy as I have from psychology or neuroscience. And so, taking all of these beyond work and management, because it's applicable to life itself. So that's what I do now. So it's very widespread in the sense it's about crafting our lives. It includes everything that you would want to include, but it's also a very inside out approach to the whole journey. And why? Because that's what it's been for me. And that's where I find most bang for the buck, but also most joy and inspiration.
I love that. And I think that's such a great example of how, people often, people I work with in my coaching is often, they think that they have to be prepared to find, the right kind of opportunities. And I often say to them, well, you may do, but actually, wouldn't it be more exciting to create your own opportunities?
Yeah.
And that's where you've just shown how, you decided, well, I need to go to Bangalore. I'm going to go to IIM Bangalore and ask them for a job. And then once you get there, you kind of tell them what was in your heart that you really wanted to do. And people resonate with that kind of thing. And I've seen it happen so many times, and it's so powerful. But it really takes self-belief, doesn't it? to do that.
Wow. And thank you, Rohini, because it never struck me till today, but it struck me now. So I used to keep thinking it's a coincidence that Vasanti picked this one course, or that Leading with Joy became such a big hit and flagship. And now I'm realizing, no, it's not coincidence. It's what you talked about, the resonance that happens when you connect your heart. It makes sense, but honestly, I hadn't acknowledged it that way till now.
Yeah, and I think also, you were earlier saying that you didn't enjoy your work before, and to find, the best business ideas are the ones that come, which are kind of trying to fill an unfulfilled need, it's an unmet need, or a need that's not properly met at the moment. And I think the point you made is that so many people go through life thinking, well, work is a different thing, like, my personal life is a different thing, completely different compartments. I don't have to enjoy work because work is all about the money. And I think what you've just pointed out is that it doesn't need to be like that.
Yeah.
That there is a way to because how many hours in your life are you spending working? How sad to not enjoy it. So I love that you're actually teaching that in a business school, which a bit like your London Business School is very left brain. And what's the reception been like for things like your personal values course and also the Leading with Joy?
It's been lovely. So and I'm seeing a change. So because I've been doing this for 10 years now, I actually have the privilege of seeing a shift in society, like shift in mindsets. Yeah. So in the beginning, when I started, my colleagues used to tease me about it. They used to say, what's this woo-woo thing? You undo all the work that we do. And, I was being dragged by my colleagues, literally. Oh, you teach happiness. How come you're not happy today? Because, they have this idea that if you teach happiness means you have to be 24/7 happy person or whatever nonsense. And I was really ragged a lot, not by the people inside the class. So one of the beautiful things about the work that I do, and at least the way I experienced it, was inside the walls of the classroom, inside a workshop, even a corporate workshop like the Leading with Joy workshop, it would be a sacred space. And I just think, there's magic, there's connection, we get it. With the PGP students, not always. There'll be some who get it and some who are just there for the credits and all of that. But I learned to deal with that because that happens in all subjects. But in the smaller programs, there would be like, when you have enough time to connect with people, we're all the same, this stuff works. But it was outside of those four walls that I felt it was a very hard sell, like, putting it on the brochure or speaking to an organization. Why are we even talking about happiness at work? And what is it? And how is it going to add to the bottom line? And, is it utopian? Is it fluffy? And that outside awkwardness is the one that has really changed. And last year, thanks to COVID, I had a lot of companies reaching out, Leading with Joy, resilience, all of it. They became common language. Yes. And the people are actually looking at this. And of course, I also think it's because, the entire field of positive psychology is really taken off. So there's a lot of science out there now, a lot of research, people know it's their stuff, but
and I think, I have a similar sort of challenge when I talk about responsible capitalism. And, we were talking about this the other day. And, people immediately think, being responsible is kind of the remit of social enterprises and not-for-profit. Capitalism is all about making money. And I sort of like to point out to them that actually by being responsible, you make more money. So go figure. For example, there's research, you probably know this, that, on average, a happy, motivated employee can be 25% more productive than an unhappy one.
Yes. Oh, yes.
It's a no-brainer, Yeah. So I love that you're kind of changing, making small changes. And I think the more we can actually create leaders who lead in that way, the ripple effect of that is going to be, powerful and noticeable over time. So I'm kind of conscious that, we could talk forever on this, and I love your story so much, Ramya. I have maybe a couple more questions before we finish. So you're obviously teaching now, and you're teaching things that you feel passionately about, and you're actually noticing that it's making, some small differences over the last 10 years that you've been teaching. You're also a coach, I think. Do you do that separately, or do you do it through the IM?
I do it on my own. So
Okay.
I'm now an adjunct faculty with IMB. So I just go in there to teach like these specific courses.
Right.
Otherwise, I run my own business, and coaching is part of my business, which I run under my own banner.
And can you tell us maybe in a couple of minutes what kind of coaching, who are your ideal clients?
Yeah. So my ideal clients are people who are actually ambitious and ambitious for more happiness, more life, more joy, more productivity, more creation, more impact. And why do I say that? It's because, remember that self-centered thing? I truly enjoy engaging with people and, feeling that sense of satisfaction of playing a role in helping them bloom and blossom and go forth. And I like to, and I have nothing against a slow unfolding versus a fast-paced unfolding. And I honor both kinds of unfolding because I've been through different phases and I know we have seasons and all of that. But it's really fun for me when the person I'm working with also wants that unfolding. And frankly, that's the only way coaching works, because I'm not there to tear a person apart and push them into the water and say, now you swim or something. That's not coaching, right? Or it's not my style anyway. And it's not even coaching. I'm here on the sidelines and I'm here to support and to, unpack and guide. And so I like to coach people who have that fire in them.
Yeah.
And apart from that, I do life coaching, I do leadership coaching. I'm not segregating on the basis of the playground that the person wants to play in.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And so my final question for you, Ramya, as a 4-year-old, you thought you wanted to be a monk, and then, it took only a few decades for you to realize that actually that's not what you wanted. Now where you are in your life today, what would your definition be of a fulfilled life?
Beautiful. So I think, when I sense making, when I go back, I realized that the monk was only a definition, right? A phrase that I learned and I associating it with the Buddhist thing and stuff like that. But what I was doing in that, as the 4-year-old in that puja room, just, chanting, and the place that it took me to was this space and peace of being me, of existing. And I still want that. I still have that as the metric of a fulfilled life. And being, occupying, embodying that peaceful space inside and outside of me, that's me. And I say outside now because I realize I used to think of the soul or spirit or whatever, the being as something that's inside. But now I realize that the being is infinite. So my body is in the being, right? So it's inside and outside both. But that's the space of my being. So embodying that and resting in that and operating from that's fulfillment.
That's beautiful. In fact, I think what's interesting is that we often look at someone who's a monk or someone who's very, lives a very simple life and almost, shuns external stimuli, that is the way to find peace and serenity, because that's what the Buddha, the image of the Buddha tells you, that you need to be sitting in the tree, under a tree. And I think what you've just said is that it reminds us that actually there are many ways in which we can find that kind of tranquility and serenity, that we don't have to become, monk-like to do that. And that is only one way of achieving that, and you've clearly shown. And the other thing that occurred to me is something, I'm a huge fan of Esther Perel. Have you heard of Esther Perel? She's
I've heard the name, but I can't immediately place her.
Yeah, I love her wisdom. She's a relationship coach, and she's written several books. And something she said, which I found very, very powerful. She said, people often think to find themselves, they need to go into a quiet room and, be alone and meditate and all of that. She said, that's all very well, but actually you really find yourself when you are with others. And the point you make about, when you go out there and, somebody you like, somebody you don't like, you're still discovering things about yourself by putting yourself out there and, allowing interactions to occur with many different stimuli. So I think you are, again, reminding us that actually meditation is a part of finding yourself, but it's an incomplete process of self-awareness. The real self-awareness.
And it might be complete for some.
Yes.
Yeah. True. So it's like a ratio proportion, right? So for some, it could be just 100% meditation and it works. And for some, it could be a work of service and engagement and that. And then you have 90-10, 70-30, 80-20, 50-50.
Exactly. And I think
change in different stages of our life also.
Correct. Exactly. That's what I was going to say. So this has been such a fascinating conversation, and I'm definitely very keen to now go and Google Vipassana and see, when I can, it seems like a huge commitment though. I'm still I love the idea, but it also scares me that for 10 days, I'm not going to be able to connect with my family, see if everything's okay. But I think we all probably need that sometimes, to just believe that,
so one of the things that can help, so before I went to Vipassana, I was not scared, but my husband then was really scared, and he kept telling me, you can run away anytime, okay? Run away, run away, run away. So if that helps, you remember, like, no one's going to hold a gunpoint to you. You can leave.
True. That's very true. And that's good advice. Thank you so much, Ramya. I've really enjoyed this conversation and so many beautiful insights from your journey. And I'm really grateful that you shared it with us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure and joy talking with you.